for both technical skills and dedication to the cause. So often we find that we hire people primarily for their technical skills, and there's often not a fit. So it's important that we recruit for both. And then, of course, the whole strength and well-being of a health center is in so many ways dependent on its employees and having the right employees in the right positions. There may be other things that you can think of, and if you want to contribute those in the question and answer dialogue process at the end, we welcome that. So what is succession planning? It's a dynamic process that anticipates change and upward mobility. It is respectful of all. It's considerate of individual careers. It is a way of circumventing train wrecks. It can be both long-term and short-term in nature. It should be a guide, but not rigid. And it's not an entitlement for anyone, because regardless of how well prepared the plan is, things always change in the interim. A successful succession plan is facilitated by adoption of vision and tools, and it initiates conversations on a regular schedule. If you think about how infrequently we talk about what our career goals are, either within our existing organization or perhaps beyond, if we get in the habit of talking about those things on a regular basis, it helps us to anticipate transitions in staff. It is separated from the evaluation process. So often the evaluation process is fraught with tension because people are normally anxious about that. So I would recommend that we not do succession planning in conjunction with individual evaluations. The process and the documentation that comes out of that should be considered confidential and should make no promises that cannot be kept. A succession plan is good for the employee and good for the organization as a whole. It should engage those involved rather than being something that's decided behind closed doors. It supports planned career development. It gets incorporated into policies, culture, and systems. It's about managing business risk, and it can and should be a multi-level, multi-team plan. So for purposes of our dialogue today, we will focus primarily on a CEO-level succession plan, and we're going to start with one primary guiding principle, and that is that the final decision always belongs to the board of directors. So before I go any further, it would be really helpful for me to know a little bit about the audience. We have a small audience today, and I would like to know if there are any special interests that the group has. Sylvia, do we have a way of inviting folks to indicate on chat whether they are more interested in this tool for purposes of CEO succession planning or career planning, or for multi-level, multidisciplinary succession planning? If they could chime in and let us know that, that would be very helpful as we proceed. But our intent at this point is to focus primarily on CEO succession planning, and we can add some additional examples based on the preferences of the group as we go forward, okay? So I say this a little tongue-in-cheek. We have examples, real-life examples of succession plans, and if you've been engaged in the community and migrant health center movement for any length of time, you may have witnessed some of these. So the first one is the emergency plan, and I call this one also known as the Mack truck plan. And that is that none of the people at the executive level are anticipating changing jobs or moving on in the immediate future, but we always have to plan for emergencies. And if we step out into the street and get hit by a truck, then there is going to be a significant void and a vacancy within the organization's leadership that needs to be filled. So oftentimes there is an emergency plan. Then there's a long-range plan in which plenty of notice is given. The next one I call the rolling 18-month plan, and this is one I've witnessed personally as some of our CEOs begin to age and they reach normal retirement age, whatever that might be for them, or a perception of the board of directors. And they never really set an exact retirement date, but it's always 18 months away. or 2 years away. And somehow we never find the moment in which that date becomes executable. There's the interim non-contender plan, and I've seen this work very successfully, where a board makes a decision that they want to have a buffer period of about 6 months, sometimes as much as a year, in which they hire or contract with a change agent to get new perspective, with the clear understanding that that non-contender who's hired on a finite basis will not stay on. And that's important because it makes it puts us in a position where we can begin to look at other members of the staff who may be interested in the position, as well as whether or not there's a need to recruit externally. The next one is the in-house multi-competitor plan. And what I find in that is that there is sometimes an anticipation that there will be a series of openings within the executive leadership team of the organization, and we find ourselves in a position where there are multiple people competing for the plan, and unfortunately this becomes a great way to lose valuable leaders. And then there's the chosen one plan, and that's the CEO successor is handpicked and groomed in advance, probably by the CEO and with the blessing of the board of directors. But remember, there's always the, the anticipation that things change. So I do have one respondent who has let me know that they're also interested in multi-level tier succession planning. So in the interest of honoring that, I want to say that the same tool that we're presenting today is adaptable, not exclusively at any one level within the organization. So if, in fact, it is something that we want to use to look for cross-training, to figure out who within departments within the organization might need to be cross-trained, not just for the benefit of the organization, but in order to address their personal growth and development goals, that becomes a way of using it for retention. Because if people have goals that exceed their current job description and they're not given an opportunity, a safe opportunity in which to express that, that becomes we run the risk of training somebody really well and losing them to the hospital or to a competitive organization in the community. So again, this tool is designed to help you open the dialogue. And I will be sure to include comments of that nature for the purpose of addressing multi-level application as we go forward. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to talk about here, there's a little lag with moving slides, is for John, to ask John to share as board chair his experience in a transition at the CEO level that took place in Golden Valley Health Centers a couple of years back. So John, over to you, and I will move slides forward when you let me know you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Bobby. Yeah, our experience, as I have learned in the last few years, is not all that unique as I've compared notes with other people who have gone through this. So one of my goals is to try to help people head this off ahead of time, and if I can be helpful, that would be great. So go ahead and move the slide. All right. So when we began our process, we literally had all these stages in our board. At first, CEO said he was going to leave, and literally it was months of denial, and we've and it's understandable because those people were around a very, very long time, and it was.
We lost audio. So, John, we lost your audio there for a second.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Mm. So I'm not hearing anything, John. Can the audience let us know via chat if they're hearing?
Can everyone else hear?
John, we have no sound.
I sent him a chat to let him know.
He's offline. How did that happen?
John, are you back on?
I can hear you the whole time. Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. You started to talk and then we had dead silence.
Okay. So the last thing, well, we're on this particular current slide. What I should tell is, if this, we went through all of these things. When our CEO, longtime CEO, first announced he was going to retire well ahead of time. I mean, literally 8 months notice. We went through about 4 or 5 months of absolute denial, and it's understandable. We had some long-term board members, some older folks who had been around a very long time and could not believe that our CEO wanted to retire. In fact, one of them said, "Oh, we just need to offer him some more money and he'll stay." And then we went through anger, and we were bargaining on whether it was really going to happen, and then finally accepted it, and then we could begin our process. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, looks like we've got a poll question here, and you'll have the opportunity to vote or to answer that poll. So if you are in this particular situation, if you experience a CEO transition in your health center in the last 5 years, answer yes or no, and if you don't know, that's fine too.
Okay, I have launched the poll question. I will give everyone a few seconds to respond. Submit your answers before I close the poll.
Now, while we're doing that, one of the purposes for having this session is if you're in this particular situation, if you're facing this, the thing I want you to take away is, it's not a bad thing. Don't panic, and don't get too worried, and we'll talk about things that will help you if this is a situation that you find yourself in.
Okay, I have gone ahead and closed the polls, and it looks like we have 86% answered no, 14% answered yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, that is, given the number of people on the call, then it's probably only me.
So we have another poll question, John, that gets to the next 5 years.
Okay.
So the next question is, do you anticipate CEO transition in the next 5 years? Yes, no, or don't know?
Okay, I have launched that poll question as well. I'll give everyone a few seconds to respond.
And I answered that one as well.
Okay.
I can say no.
Thank goodness, right?
Yeah, God forbid.
Okay, a few more seconds before I close it. Okay, I have closed the poll, and it looks like we have an equal number here. 33% answered yes, 33% answered no, and 33% answered C, don't know.
All right, so there's a couple more of you out there. All right. Okay.
So, John, before we go to the tool, do you want to talk just a little more about your experience and how that went for you at Golden Valley?
So, I don't remember where this is in the slides, but my slides I think are after this, so I can wait if you'd like.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to go forward then. I'm just going to give you a brief introduction to the tool, and it is in essence a timeline. And for those of you who've already downloaded the tool, you'll know that it's in Word. We tried to make it as flexible as possible and make sure that we would have the maximum number of spaces for people to respond. I'm going to go through it very quickly, and then I have some tips for you. So the first one is sort of historical, and it starts in 2010. And the reason for that, I think of the old Spanish adage, tell me where you come from, and I'll tell you where you're going. And so in addition to referring to geography, I think it also refers to personal experiences. So the way I recommend that you use this is to share with the employee that you're working with, if you're using it for career planning or for succession planning at any level. I would share the tool with the employee as a supervisor and invite them to enter personal information below the line with the understanding that that's just formative process and that they're not going to be required to share that with their supervisor, and then perhaps some career benchmarks up above. So if you're talking about someone who is a nurse, when they graduated from school, when they had their first job, what that was, and so any benchmarks that came along. The next one is more current, starting with 2015 and moving into a 5-year phase. And one of the things that I've learned in my own personal career growth and development is that I was very blessed by a series of upward mobility steps in my career, none of which were by my own design. In many cases, it was luck and happenstance, and I was not the steward of my career development. And fortunately, things went well for me, but that could very easily not have occurred. And so setting career goals, and whether those be related to position, levels of authority, whether that be related to growth and development or wanting to move into another field, those are the kinds of things that if we think about and write down for our own purposes, and then select those things that we want to share with our employer, that can be done here. And because life is long, I've prepared another sheet here for you that will take it even beyond the next 5 years. So we go from 2019 to 2020 and then on to 224. And I have to share with you on a personal level, in the process of developing this tool to open dialogue between supervisor and supervisee, and to invite employees to think strategically about their own career goal, I experimented with it myself. And so the kinds of things that became important for me were when my first grandchild was born on a personal level. And since I've adopted him, it's now become important to look at things like when he gets a driver's license, and when he starts high school, and when I need to anticipate that he starts college, and all of the financial responsibilities associated with that. And so that helps me to think about, as since I'm nearing the end of my professional career, that helps me to think about how long I want to continue to work so that I don't become that rolling 18-month succession plan CEO. And so as you work with this privately, you may find that it's useful for you personally as well as professionally. And so the basic guidelines, and these are all printed on the tool, include selecting the time frame for the dialogue, which is best suited to the tenure and the position of the employee. And we'll talk more about that at the CEO level, but since we do have some individuals that are interested in using it at other levels as well, you might want to think about which department you want to use that in, and I recommend it be a department-by-department process. Anticipating that there are a lot of personal things that people may not want to talk about in a group, it should be an individual process. And take a look at whether we're talking about the next 12 months or the next 2 years or the next 5 years, and make those plans accordingly. And what we have found is that by opening the dialogue in a non-threatening way, in a manner that's not associated with annual evaluation, we invite people to talk about the goals that they have. And it sometimes can be very helpful in averting unnecessary turnover among staff. I can think of a couple of places in our national network of health centers where individuals who were key to the executive committee had elderly parents that they anticipated that they would want to move geographically closer to. And that was never talked about at the time that they were hired, nor during the previous 5 years of employment with the organization. And then suddenly things came to a head, and that individual needed to resign suddenly and move to another part of the country. And unfortunately, she was one of the most successful fundraisers in the organization, and that left a big void. So again, opening that dialogue on a personal level as well as a professional level then allows the employer and the employee to talk about how to best meet those needs. So the next step then is to select a focus for the purpose of the tool, again, best suited to the tenure and position. And it could include a need for professional development, cross-training, setting career goals, assessing staff satisfaction in retirement, or succession planning. And again, for purposes of this webinar, we will focus primarily on CEO-level succession planning. Introducing the dialogue by agreeing on a desired focus and asking open-ended questions that will facilitate what should become an ongoing conversation over an extended period of time. Through discussion, identify not more than 3 to 5 goals for the time frame selected. And I would recommend that as a supervisor, you, in working with other employees, with your employees, those who report to you, you might set the example for open dialogue by being open about your own professional goals in whatever way that it's appropriate to the relationship, if you also want to talk about personal goals. But again, remember that those personal goals are personal goals, and an employee is not required to share those with you. I recommend that landmark events and dates for historic events in the career of the employee and projection of goals, those things go above the timeline, as mentioned earlier. The employee is encouraged to use the space below the timeline to document his or her personal landmark events, which do not need to be shared, and that taking the time to think about those things may facilitate setting career goals. So if you're using this on a department-by-department level, starting with the executive team, use the tool to then summarize and color code projected transitions. So taking a blank form, then as the supervisor, you combine the results of those so that you can do the best job possible of helping those individuals that you supervise to manage to manage and to achieve their stated goals. And of course you need to agree on those goals. So the timeline is here again for you, and I'm going to blast through that since you've already seen it, and hopefully you have downloaded a copy for your own use. And so, John, I think that we want to start here. I saw a quick chat from you, but it disappeared, so I'm going to turn it over to you, John, at this point and let you go from here. Change the slide. Got it.
Okay, so what I alluded to briefly earlier was we had our CEO announce in October that he would be leaving at the end of June. So we had plenty of notice, and after that meeting I was talking with another board member, and the first thing she said was, "You mean we have to get a new one?" So yes, we have to get a new one, and so that was a process. And as I said earlier, we went through all the stages of the Elizabeth Kubler Ross the grieving process, and it began with denial. It started with denial, and it was in denial for the longest period of time. So we can change the slide. Okay, so it starts like this. Our CEO has just told us that that he or she will retire in 6 months. Oh no! Now what are we going to do? What are we going to do? All right. Step 1. Don't panic. Don't panic. Step 2, don't panic. And step 3, finally, most importantly, don't panic. Step 4, get out of denial. This will happen. It's okay. You can handle this. You'll be fine, but it will happen. So get used to the fact immediately. And step 5 is implement your plan. And then the next question is, wait a minute, we don't have a plan. We have no plan. So what are we going to do? All right, we're gonna talk about how to implement your plan. In talking with several groups of board members and other people who have gone through this, people who have called me and said, what do I do, what do I do? Even one particular consulting firm called me and said, we need to help somebody with what should we do. So these are my recommendations on the seam that the transition that seems to be the smoothest. All right, first, hire an interim CEO that doesn't want to be the CEO. There are plenty of them around in the United States that you can get a hold of, because it's going to be important to have a buffer between the departing leader and the new leader, especially if that leader has been there a long time, say the founding CEO or the founding leader. It's going to be very important to have a time buffer. And there are really good reasons for this, and one of those is what you want to do is not, because you're going to find things, even with the best CEO and the best systems, you're going to find things that in this process that you need to change or fix or get better at, and what we don't want is the new CEO to be blamed for stuff. And so if you have somebody who's an interim CEO that wants to be CEO, you have to be careful, because you can set them up for failure. And then get some help, get professional help. And I don't mean psychiatry, I mean get a consultant, a firm that can help coach you and guide you through this work. You've got a lot of work that needs to be done, and you need some help to do that. This next slide. Okay, we have a poll question.
Okay, poll question number 3. For those who have experienced CEO level transitions in the last 5 years, did you find that it went smoothly or successfully? I will go ahead and launch the poll question. You can answer A, yes, B, no, or C, don't know.
So I realize that that's a two-part question. So why don't we start with, did it go smoothly?
Okay, about 10 more seconds, and then we'll close the poll. Okay, I have closed the poll, and it looks like we had 50% that answered C, don't know, and 25% equally for A, yes, and B, no.
Okay. So, Sylvia, I recommend we skip the successfully for the moment and move on to the next. There we go. So the next one is, was the outcome successful? Because it could be not smooth and still be successful.
Okay, I'll let everyone submit their answers. Okay, about 3 more seconds. Okay, I have closed the polls, and it looks like 100% answered yes.
Wow, successful. That's great.
So what that tells us is goes back to what I said. Don't panic. We can get through this.
We have one more poll question here, and that is, for those who expect a CEO level transition in the next 5 years at your health center, do you have a written transition plan in place? Yes, no, or don't know?
Okay, I have launched that poll question. About 10 seconds. Close the poll. Okay, this time it looks like 83% answered A, yes, and 17% answered B, no.
So back to you, John.
Okay. So my recommendations for how to go about this is, first off, you establish a CEO transition committee of the board of directors. Depending on how big your board is, this could be really cumbersome if everybody's involved, because there are some decisions and some things that you need to do that are a little bit faster paced. Not to cut anybody out of the process, but it works a little bit better if you've got a working committee to do this. So if you've got a CEO transition committee of the board, then you want to have a transition committee that puts on some key staff and that represent stakeholders of the corporation. You're going to have providers that are going to be very nervous. You're going to have administrative staff that are going to be very nervous, and you get a committee together to talk with them about what's going on, because there are going to be some steps that that you can take, and you want to be going about that. So change the slide, please. Okay, so part of what you want to do with the help of your consultant or your coach is you're going to do an assessment that says we're going to see what we look like. You're going to look at yourself honestly. You're going to look at lots of things, but you're going to do an assessment of the corporation. You're going to find out about your finances. You're going to find out about your systems, but you want to find out who you are. Not what you think you are, but who you really are. Not, again, not who you think you are or what you've been told that you are, because everybody, a lot of times you get told rosy things, but you want to find out what others see and think that you are. And so in order to do that, you're going to have to ask people to be honest and clear, and you're going to ask them to answer questions. You're going to survey your staff. Use the CEO Transition Committee for help and feedback. Okay, this is the one that includes staff. You want to, and you can have your consultant can help you do this, but you want to survey strategic partners that you work with. You want to survey community stakeholders, and we did this. We want to survey community leaders and educational leaders and people within the county, people within the city, different cities that we're in. We want to survey also our collaborative partners that we have, that the people that we work with pretty regularly, to see what they think about us. And we went through that, and we found some very interesting stuff. Part of our assessment of the organization, then, the board did its own assessment of itself. What we did is we looked at ourselves very carefully and our effectiveness, and some of the things that we learned we put into action. We want to assess the strengths and weaknesses of individual board members, and you want to learn how you work together. One of the really good things that that several of us did, and our board is going to do this now because we've got several new board members on the board and new board members coming on the board, was we read a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and it was very helpful to learn how we work together and to begin to trust each other to tell the stories of where we want to go. So once the assessment of the corporation and the board is complete, then you have to sit down, and this is what the board does. You sit down and you talk about this, okay? What do we do about the stuff we don't like? And these were literal questions that we had. We said, what happened to us? How we thought we were different than this, and we found out some stuff that we didn't like, and so we began to say, okay, this is how we're going to fix that. So take a look at your mission, your vision, and your values, and think and talk about those things, because you either need to redefine them or recommit to what they are, okay? And this is a very important part of the process, because it's going to help you define what kind of leader that you need going forward. It's going to help you decide what that person, he or she, looks like. All right? So part of that is you want to define the skills, the ability, and the experience that you need in your new leader. You want to define, if you dare, the temperament and personality, and discern what you need for your corporation's new chief executive officer. Now, this is something that was very important to lots of organizations, but specifically to us. One of the things that we discovered in our process is that we needed somebody with a very good grasp on the financials. We needed somebody, because we are in a position where we needed to really get our head around that, and it worked out well for us. But we were honest enough to say that's what we needed. And then the other thing is we talked about what kind of person do we need, he or she, to be one to work with the board and to and with our partners and all kinds of things. And it's a careful way to say what we found is in our world, with our collaborative partners and our strategic partners and our stakeholders, we needed somebody who we were told over and over and over again, we needed somebody who was more willing to work collaboratively with everybody. We needed somebody that wasn't afraid to not always be the king or the queen. And so doing this stuff, and I know that answering these kinds of questions about yourself and taking a look at it, I know it's scary, but it's okay.
So John, I want to ask you a question. I assume you don't wait until the 6 months are up to start this process. No. My advice is to begin that process early. Now you have to be really careful, because if your existing chief executive officer says, hey, I'm going to retire in 6 months, you don't want to start the very next day, and because you don't want to make that person feel like you can't wait to get rid of them. There is a dance to this, but it will take a few months to just, could take a couple of months just to identify a coach or a consultant to help you. And the earlier you start to at least talk about this is the earlier. It's quicker to get out of denial, because you're going to have people in denial even if they're working on it. They're just not going to accept it yet. And so it's important to start as soon as you know, but do it with sensitivity to the existing leader, that you're not trying to kick them out. Another caveat is, when you start, you want to be respectful, but it is not the existing CEO's job to pick their replacement. That's happened in a few places, and there are times when it works, but there are times that it has not worked well at all. And so there is a dance, but my recommendation is that you at least start identifying a coach or a consultant. You start getting a committee together, and you start that process. So John, would one way to avoid losing a couple months in finding the right consultant be to look for a consultant now, either to help you develop a plan or to help you review the plan that you've got in place and develop the elements of it, even before a resignation might be submitted, and also to look at that at a multi-tiered level, so that it's not just an exclusive CEO succession plan, but you seek that guidance and establish the relationship with the consultant on other potential transitions prior to when you need it desperately and have to act fast.
I agree. Yeah, that's an excellent point and good counsel. If you can have your board or your folks think this through and begin to talk about it, that's great. Obviously, if you are thinking about someone retiring or transitioning, specifically talking about CEOs, but if that's within 5 years, if you know that's 5 years away, you have some time. But if you have used the tools and have identified that this could be a couple years away, and yeah, it's a great idea to start to develop a plan that you can put in place, because then you already know there isn't any fear involved in this, and you can just jump in and get this thing done. So if you have a plan in place, you're not scared, you're not worried, okay. But one of the first things that goes back to what I said earlier is that the idea of having an interim CEO who doesn't want the job, and if you do that, you can do that fairly quickly, and that person can start. You can already have that person identified a few months in advance, and then you can move forward. So yeah, that's a great idea. If you can have a written plan and you've got it in place ahead of time, that's great. So once you've got your committee up and running, and you've assessed yourself and you've talked about that stuff, you can then develop a profile for the CEO candidates out there. Because you know now what your organization looks like. You know what you need to do, what you want to either fix or encourage or develop better or celebrate about what you are, and then you can look for and define that person that you want. And then you develop an announcement that goes with that, and then you put that out there. For many organizations, that you're going to do that online, or you're going to, depending on your coach or your consultant or your plan, you can give that to headhunters if you want, and you say, this is the person we're looking for, and if you can find somebody for us, that's great. We chose not to do that because we used our consultant, and then we broadcast it to multiple places, and we had about 70 or more responses and expressions of interest from people who wanted to at least be considered for the job. So once you've got that broadcasted out, you'll begin to get responses, and you want your coach or your consultant to be the one that receives these. You don't want it coming to the board chair or to the committee, because it's a lot of work that somebody needs to help you manage
the paper flow.
Yes, and distill it down. So so go to the next.
So John, if you don't mind, before we go there, I want to ask you, what happens if an organization thinks that they have an appropriate candidate internal to the organization and they want to start there first rather than broadcasting externally first?
Well, if they've gone through the steps that I've talked about, where they've honestly assessed themselves as a board and as an organization, and how do they, how they work with stakeholders, do they play nicely with others? Do they, all the things that are important. If you've identified all of those things and you've answered those tough questions, and you have somebody that fits that, hey, everybody's situation is different. I can see that working out quite well if you already know that.
So a question would be, is an organization obligated to recruit externally, or can they stop with an internal search?
You can definitely have an internal search. You don't need to look outside. However, if you have identified some shortcomings or some areas that need to be improved, and you have honestly done that, and I'm using the word honestly because this is difficult for some people to do, to say, wait a minute, I'm not the board member that I should be, or I'm not the or we are not the organization we should be. We've gotten some feedback that we do this terribly and we need to fix it, or we got some feedback that we're really good at this. And then you've identified your candidate profile, and if you have somebody internal that does that, that's great. But the caveat is this, especially in very long-term organizations, if you haven't honestly looked at yourself and you haven't identified that, you might be perpetuating something that may not be as healthy as you want it to be. But if you have, and you've got that person, I think it's fine.
So I think that brings us back to your recommendation of hiring someone external for a 6-month buffer to go through that process, even if you think you may ultimately end up with an internal candidate.
I would say especially if you would end up with an internal candidate, because you do want a buffer time between the departing leader and a new leader. And if you have identified a candidate that you think might be that person, I think it's a great idea to have a buffer in between, because, and again, I'll go back to it, you need to pull out the corporate mirror and look at yourself very specifically and carefully. And if you have an internal candidate that looks like that might work, you don't want to contaminate the system during your internal review with somebody in place. So my recommendation is to get an interim, especially. Yeah. So once you have somebody working this paperwork for you, you have somebody that's going to distill down these resumes and rank them and come up with a list of candidates. And so what we asked our consultant and coach to do is to take all of those in and come up with a list of 10, the top 10, and then we interviewed the top 10 candidates. We had some, and we did it in multiple ways. But one, we did it by Skype. We did it by a video off of a computer, but that wasn't Skype. We also did in-person interviews with people who were, within our state, and also internal candidates. We had 3 internal candidates for the job, and so we interviewed them in person. We had another external candidate that was within our state, and it was easy to bring that person in. We interviewed that person in person, and then we did Skype interviews with I think probably 6, and we did one of them just off of a computer video. It wasn't Skype. It was very helpful to be able to do the Skype interviews, and especially with today's technology, because we saved a lot of money not flying somebody in from Chicago. We talked to a candidate from Atlanta. We talked to a candidate from Ohio. And so we were able to distill this down, and we came to the top 3 candidates. And for us, the top 3 candidates were 1 internal and 2 external. And that's where we were. So, next slide, please. So we then set up the interview with the top 3 candidates. Now this is all personal, face-to-face interviews. The top 3 candidates were given tours of the facilities as was appropriate. Now, with an internal candidate, we didn't have to do that, but we did do face-to-face interviews the same way. One of the things that we did was we invited our candidates, and we had meals with them. We had breakfast, we had lunch, and we did some other little things. And as we were touring facilities and as we were doing our things, we watched the candidates interact with the staff and watch the staff's reaction to them, and everybody is aware that they were meeting a potential CEO candidate. And so it's always a little bit strange, but it worked out fairly well. And then once we did all of those things, and every board member was required to do it. And in our particular board, we had one person that didn't do any of the interviews, didn't interact with any of the candidates, didn't do that. It was just that was the choice of that person not to do it. It was very disappointing. But as a board chair, if I ever had to do this again, I would literally set up a rule that you have to participate in this process, and if you don't get to vote on who the candidate would be. So after you've done all that, then we met with staff, and we got feedback from individual staff members about how they felt about their time in meeting the candidates. And all it was feedback. We did not, it wasn't a vote by staff, it was just feedback. You know, oh, I really thought this person was really listening to me. I watched them interact with providers, and it was really good, or you know, whatever. And so we listened to staff about their feedback, and it was multiple layers of staff, providers and administrator. We had assistants, you know, we had receptionists. We talked with lots of people, and it really helped us round it out. So then we then convened the board after we talked with our top 3 candidates. We've talked about what we heard. We heard from everybody, and in our particular case, we sat down, and the first thing I said is, well, before we discuss anybody, let's see where we are with you know, our vote. Let's see how far apart we are on our selection before we, you know, go anywhere else. And so we had a vote, and in our particular case, it was unanimous for one person, which I thought was just phenomenal. I was over the top happy, because that means everybody really paid attention, because when we went into this, I know that we had people who had differing opinions on the person that we should hire. And so for us, it was unanimous. The only vote that wasn't unanimous was the one board member who chose not to participate in the process. And apparently, you know, they had already made their mind up about a candidate, and it wasn't the one that all of the other board members did. So that told me a little bit about how that went. Now, I can tell you on the back side of this, that person has now said, oh my goodness, did we do the right thing? And so it's on the backside is good. So obviously once if you come to a place where you've decided this is our person, then you need to talk within yourselves, and you can all have done this already. You know, we didn't do this as well as we should have. But one of the things that I've counseled people now is you can also engage firms that can do compensation studies about what CEOs in your state are receiving, the benefits package that they have, and you can have that done ahead of time, because you want to discuss that before you offer a job to a CEO. So you want to appoint a designated person, if you haven't done that already, to meet with your CEO candidate and negotiate the contract that you've established, and then talk about a timeline for bringing them on the board, or bringing them on for the corporation. So next slide, please. Then, and for us, it was the chairman of the transition committee, which happened to also be me. So I met with our coach and our consultant and our candidate, and we talked about what our package was that we could offer, and then we talked about how we would go forward. So the
John,
other
I have to jump in and tell you how critical that is. I have worked with one organization that spent a lot of time doing the internal assessment process that you described, including drafting a job description and clearly articulating sort of what percentage of time should be spent internally and what percentage should be spent externally at the community or local or state or national level. And when it came time to do the first evaluation of their new and very, very successful CEO, they pulled out an old evaluation form that didn't relate to the new job description at all.
Yes.
And evaluated that person and delivered an evaluation on the basis of something that was not related to his job.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And one of the things that we did is we also got another consultant to help us develop a tool to evaluate the CEO specifically based on our strategic plan and those things that we had said. And when it came time for the first evaluation, we went basically off of stuff that we had said in our evaluation. This is the kind of person we want, and we evaluate our CEO on that. And it was pretty easy to do. Now the next evaluation is now based on goals that the CEO and the board have set together, because now it's a collaborative evaluation tool, but it's the same tool, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel every year. The idea is we've set goals. Now we know next when it comes time to evaluate our CEO and it'll be in about 4 months that we'll do this for the second time. We now have something that we've set together to evaluate against, and so that's a very important thing. One of the things you don't want to do is what Bobby just alluded to, is you hire somebody and then evaluate them on stuff that doesn't even count anymore. You want to get out of that. And I would suggest developing a tool that evaluates the CEO on parameters that matter to CEOs, because you're talking about somebody who has the most unique job in the corporation. Next slide, please. All right, so you've chosen somebody, you've agreed to terms, you're paying more money than you ever thought you would, because that's how it really works. And it's time to celebrate the arrival of the new CEO. Have several events that people can come to where you can introduce your CEO to the community and to the staff and celebrate this. Make this a big deal. This is something to really, really celebrate. And how the board chooses to do that will set a little bit of the expectations for the staff. And
so John, that slide's out. I'm just going to go on.
Okay. All right. And part of what we did is we established a process for how we're going to bring the new CEO. Okay. And this really can be critical. So you go to the next slide. And it's critical. And here's a couple of things. In the 2011 Daring to Lead national study of nonprofit leaders, they found that among current executives, 33% followed a leader who was fired or forced to resign, and indicating the frequency of mishires and unclear expectations because of boards and executives. In other words, boards hired people and weren't clear about what they expected, and then they ended up firing somebody because that person didn't meet their expectations, which goes back to what I said earlier. Really look at yourself and really say, this is what we need, and tell that person, this is what we expect you to do. New leaders need intentional support and development as they build efficacy in their role. Okay, this is this level of onboarding, and it's very distinct from a new hire orientation. Everybody has to go through. This is how you do your paycheck. This is where the fire extinguishers are. All the little things, just orientation about health insurance, all things. But with the CEO, the long-term success is important in this transition process. Next slide. And I can tell you, and I'll be very honest, we did not do this as well as I wanted to. And part of that reason is because our coach, our consultant, after we had gone through this, retired about 4 months after, or about 3 months after we hired our new CEO, and that person was our coach for the onboarding. And so we hit a little, and I won't say rough patch, but we got to a point where it was my sense that our CEO didn't feel as supported as they should, and so what we ended up doing was hiring a coach for our CEO, so that they could feel supported and encouraged, and because this is important, especially if you have somebody who hasn't been a CEO before or has been a CEO of a smaller organization. If you're a large organization, there's a different cat. Our particular organization is kind of large. It's a $100 million budget, and to be the CEO of that type of organization is different than being a CEO of a smaller one. And so we brought a coach on board, and that has been phenomenally successful. So you want to bring your CEO on board, but you don't want to just drop them in the deep end of the pool without a continual dialogue with the board and how things are going. And in our particular case, we've had an ongoing thing with the CEO, myself, and some other board members where we get together for lunch regularly just to chat. Hey, how's it going? How are you feeling about this? Or what do you think about that? And it's really helped keep dialogue open so that person feels more encouraged about where they are in their role.
So, John, before you go to your last slide here, I'd like to pose a couple of questions that you and I can chat about. You talked about the size of your health center and your health center network, and I'd like to suggest that we dialogue about how this might differ slightly for a smaller organization that may not have as many resources available, either dollar resources to purchase services of a consultant, or even be located in an area that doesn't have those resources immediately available. I think the general principles still stand in terms of making sure that there are some things that you really shouldn't try to do for yourself or allow your outgoing CEO to do. So how would you advise an organization that's maybe more in the $5 million range to go about this process?
Okay, I even if it's a smaller organization, I still think that these steps are important. And if you don't have the resources to hire some help, then figure out a way to do it. Perhaps you can get some grant money from somebody to help you with that, and I know organizations have done that where they just don't have the money themselves to get a coach. But this is really important, and the feds know it's important too, to maybe get some help from organization. For I know in California, California Endowment has helped with some groups to do that kind of thing, because especially if you're small, you still need to do this right. It doesn't matter that you're not big. It still needs to be done well. So my advice is get some help. But it is scalable. It's very scalable. If you're smaller, and it's not going to take you as long to do your self-assessment. If there are a lot of advantages to that. We in our particular group, one of the reasons we got help is we have 800 employees. And we wanted to make sure that we were as best as we could, not scaring people in the process. Smaller organizations.
So one example that I've seen happen is an organization that hired an interim, non-competing candidate to be that buffer, and placed some responsibility on that person to be the quote-unquote objective third party managing the transition process. Do you have any advice around that?
I know of one place where that has actually worked very well, and that's actually a really good idea, especially for a smaller organization, and if that interim is willing to do that, it's actually pretty helpful.
Okay, good. And then if we try to also apply these concepts not just at the CEO level, but at other levels within the organization, I think we sometimes place so much value on the highest position in the organization, because that's and in fact that's the one position that the board is involved in. But if a CEO wanted to use these tips to look at potential transitions for long-term executive team members, I think that these principles still, and the use of the tools, still apply. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And any I know for me and my own company, I am constantly looking at who we are, how we interact in our community, how our products are working. What's our performance? You do that all the time. And if you have a strategic plan in place, and if you have your mission, vision, and values done, then the CEO is going to look at members of the leadership team through those things as well, especially with regards to performance in the strategic plan.
And so assuming that our health centers are all engaging in strategic planning on a regular basis, because that is a requirement as per the program requirements of health centers, then the assessment for purposes of recruiting become just an additional step if they haven't already been included in the overall strategic plan. Would you agree?
I would agree, and you obviously have so much more experience with working with the CEOs and boards in this light. And what's more important for me to say is, okay, do you agree with that?
Well, I have seen it work very well, and it's also very helpful if there's a current strategic plan rather than if there's been a big gap between the previous one and the current one, because what happens is the organization loses focus and direction if they don't have a current strategic plan.
Right.
And I think that as a CEO who is nearing retirement age myself, of course, one of the things that I want to do is to be sure that I leave something of a legacy rather than a mess. And
right.
So it's my responsibility working with the board to keep our strategic plan up to date and make sure that the board is assessed, the board is apprised of our internal assessment on a regular basis so that there won't be a lot of surprises when I'm gone. And so I think that works to the advantage not only of the corporation, but of the outgoing individual.
Yeah, one thing that's important for board members to recognize is that the strategic plan that you come up with is the corporation's strategic plan, but it really is the board's strategic plan because you are the corporation. And when you have a plan, you want to regularly assess yourself based on what you said you wanted to do, and we do that regularly now. It's every quarter we say, how are we doing, relative to our strategic plan, because why have it if you're not going to assess yourself against it?
Great. So John, I'm gonna invite you to join in with NCFH and marry our tool with your tips and see if we can use that to put together an example of a comprehensive plan that would be used for this purpose. Would you be willing to work with me to do that?
Oh, you bet.
Okay. Well, then I will commit to the people on this call that once we get that prototype put together, that we'll send a copy of that out for them and invite them to provide input and comments.
Good.
Good. So you want to read your last slide here, and then we can take questions and answers.
Okay. I believe that we are solely responsible for our choices, and we have to accept the consequences of every deed, word, and thought throughout our lifetime.
Well, that's a lot more exciting than denial.
Yeah, well, and she knows what she's talking about.
I think that it's important as we think about the opening slide with the quote from Elizabeth Kubler Ross and this closing slide, that we talk about the fact that when these transitions occur, they can be very, very positive, although sometimes staff perceive them as negative because of the insecurity that they might feel about what lies ahead. How will the new leader act? How will they proceed? Will my job be in jeopardy? Will I have to get out of my comfort zone? And so I think that there is, to a certain degree, grief that is anticipated and experienced when a long-standing member of a team leaves, especially at the CEO level. So I love the fact that you quoted Ross here. Thank you so much.
You bet. And the other thing folks want to remember, that transitions like this, we've laid out some general guidelines. There are some CEO transitions where there's no grieving. There's not grief, it's excitement and giddiness, but that doesn't take away the fact that you'll still need to follow some steps to make sure that you're doing this correctly and following.
So Sylvia, do you want to go ahead and open this up for question and answers and let turn on people's microphones. If people would prefer, they can submit any questions by chat, or they can let us know that they would like to ask them verbally.
Okay. Sure. I don't see any questions in the chat feature at this time. And if anyone has any questions, please submit them. You can send them to the entire audience, and we can all see the question that you are asking.
Okay, either we answered all the questions or people are multitasking. I'm not sure which.
Yeah, when there aren't any questions, you wonder, were you just that awesome or were you just that bad?
That bad?
Yeah.
Well, you know, this is a different medium. John and I have done this workshop together personally, and the interaction is actually a little more dynamic in person. We do have one last poll question, or a couple poll questions actually. Not moving forward. Here we go. Poll question number 6. Would your organization be willing, or maybe I should say interested, in field testing this tool with guidance from NCFH?
Okay, I have launched that question. I'll give everyone a few seconds to respond. Okay, about 10 more seconds, and I'll close the poll. Okay, I am closing the poll, and it looks like we have 50% that answered maybe, 33% answered yes, and 17% answered no.
Okay. Well, we will, I believe we have contact information on the next slide for you, and there is specific information there on how to reach me and how to reach John via email. So having trouble going forward here. Hold on, let me see if I can close this, and there we go. So if you are among the percentages that said yes or maybe and would like to drop me an email, I will be very happy to respond and talk about how we can do that. I hope for the individual, Molly, thank you, that was interested in using this information for a multi-level tool, that this has been helpful. And if you need more information on how to use it internally rather than at the board level for CEO recruitment, we'd be happy to talk to you about that by phone or by email. And here at NCFH, we have full video conferencing capabilities as well. So we're happy to walk you through this in any way that's helpful.
And Bobby,
thank you all very much.
I have one question that came in through the chat.
Sure.
This is from Teresa, and she's asking, do you have suggestions for questions to ask when doing your organizational assessment?
Well, I would suggest, and then John, I want to hear your answer too, I would suggest that we start with a traditional SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And that needs to be accompanied by both an external environmental analysis and an internal environmental analysis, because you've got to know what the reality of the things you have to work with are in order to then make your plans accordingly. So yes, we can help you with the formation of those questions. If you want to contact me privately, I'll work with you on those. And with your permission, we'll include those in the template that we put together.
The other, another thing is, our coach helped us develop the questions that we asked of ourselves. But the other thing is we also had that consulting group talk to the stakeholders and the other collaborative partners that we have, and those were some different questions at all. But we talked very specifically about how, especially externally, how are we perceived in our community? how are we perceived with our collaborative partners? How are we perceived with our vendors? How with other things? And obviously, some people were very honest, brutally honest, and it wasn't. In a couple of spots, it wasn't fun at all. But there are often, if you think about the questions, some of them are self-evident. You won't have any trouble, but there are some that you want to be careful and ask yourself.
And I would imagine that as you ask questions internally, not just at the board level but at the staff level, that there's probably a number of communication issues that kind of become endemic to the culture of any organization, especially one that has multiple sites and is trying to communicate across multiple sites and many, many miles. And I think that it's one thing to ask those questions. It's another thing to then use, not only ask for questions, but ask for solutions, ask for barriers and ask for solutions, and then apply that to setting guidelines for how you determine the organization's culture, how you influence the organization's culture. And that too can be very painful, just like asking your external partners for their feedback. But it can all be very positive, especially if it's handled by an objective outside third party that isn't in a position to get all emotional about it.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everybody. We appreciate your time, and I'm glad that we weren't pressed for time. So I hope this has been helpful to you. I know that Sylvia will be sending out a couple evaluation questions for you, and we look forward to feedback on the use of the tool and these tips. So please don't hesitate to contact us. Just identify yourself as a participant on this webinar. It's a small, intimate group. So we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
Thanks, John.
That's our webinar.